Hello, magpies, and welcome to this series I call Dungeon Mastery, wherein I proffer up whatever tips and tricks I have learned in 25 years of DMing. For new or for experienced DMs, or just for those looking to understand the game a little better, I bid you welcome, and remember, the qualities that make a good DM are not proprietary to any one gaming system. So, go swooping nuts. Today we will cover my own style of taking effective combat notes. As our games increasingly go online, we get access to a whole range of helpful software and widgets to, at least in theory, make our games easier to run. The digital character sheet is a great improvement, for example, putting the reference material right into the sheet, thus eliminating a huge time waster of having to constantly flip through books and look up rule descriptions. Some innovations are fairly neutral in nature, such as virtual dice, which empower transparency of dice rolls at the cost of tactile sensation, while others offer very little to no material benefit, in my opinion, such as any number of insufferable campaign trackers or world-building apps that merely replace a quickly scrawled note with a professional study in databasing. There is one category of digital tools in particular which, while providing real utility, nonetheless as a personal preference stir my rancor. I am speaking, of course, of initiative trackers. I understand their appeal, I guess. I mean, in that they sort of let you track the names, it sorts them in order and lets you click through them or whatever, but at the end of the day, I can track a lot more than just turn order with a pen and paper, and all without having to compartmentalize data across a dozen apps, windows, or drop-down menus. So I would argue that the hypothetical dungeon mastery, as it were, is a consequence of knowing and understanding both digital and pen and paper methods side by side to take what is best from each, and then to go in a new direction that is solely defined by neither. Therefore, magpies, to aid in your going your own way, I want to share with you my own methods of tracking all relevant combat information. Very simply, through a refined note-taking process that I have developed to the point where I don't even need to bother with a DM screen to hide my combat notes anymore. Because pretty much anything I might need to write down will be something that the players could very well work out by themselves. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so to demonstrate, I will need the assistance of my beautiful girlfriend, Myra. Say hi, Myra. Looking like a Black Panther there in white gloves for some reason. Alright, so here is my notebook. I only ever use one brand of notebook and one brand of pen. Sponsor me, Spyrex and Pentel, you cowards. Anyway. First, I will explain how I use the space across the page, and then I will show you how it all works by running an example combat. I use both pages of the notebook. The right side is for tracking important campaign data. I'll have the game session number and the in-game date. Maybe I'll record the name of an NPC I made up on the fly so I can add them to my master NPC document later. Maybe if the party finds some loot, I'll record its value here, or maybe the name of an unidentified magic item. It's just a general game log, just go nuts, do whatever. Then, when combat starts, I will use the same page to track initiative and status effects, which I shall cover shortly. Meanwhile, on the left page, I will be making quick notes, and in combat, I will track damage dealt, spell slots, and so on. Alright, so let's segue into combat notes, and start with how I record damage on the left-hand page. As a personal rule, I never ever write down a creature's current hit points. Instead, I like to record how much damage it has taken. I do this for two reasons. First of all, it uses less brain power to add than to subtract, and as a DM, you should always be finding ways to work smarter, not harder. And secondly, I do it this way because it means that I don't have to worry about players seeing my combat notes. If they happen to glance across at my notebook, all they will see is a number that they could have worked out themselves if they were so inclined to record it. And nothing is given away. Ultimately, really, when you think about it, there is no need to write down the monster's hit points because I'll have the monster entry open on my phone or on my second monitor or on my tablet or whatever I'm happening to use that day. So I'll always have its maximum hit points right in front of me to compare. Honestly, counting damage upwards is such a small yet sensible thing that I can't imagine why I ever did it any other way. Meanwhile, for recording spell slots, I will largely play it by ear since it only comes up intermittently. In a typical combat of limited spellcasting, I just list out the spell slots, spell levels, and I'll make tally marks to indicate expended slots and then cross-reference with the statistic block as I go. But if I want to track spell slots more effectively, especially in the case of higher level spellcasters, I use the hug and kiss method. I draw circles representing the number of available spell slots and cross them off as they are expended, until the page looks like a big ol' Christmas card from Grandma. Alright, so that's the basics of page setup, so let's go ahead and dive into the real meat and potatoes and cover my patented initiative tracking system. To make it as simple as possible, whereby I eliminate all unnecessary numbers from the page, I will start by listing the combat participants in order from highest to lowest initiative rolls without ever actually recording the numbers rolled in initiative checks. Because, well, let's be real. Once you have the order, you don't actually need the number anymore. Not unless you have a new person enter the combat and you need to know where to insert them in the combat order, but I have a workaround for that too, which I shall go over shortly. Now, a word of warning here though, I should say that this first step of actually writing the names down in order is the biggest headache, because it briefly requires your undivided attention, but also because it requires your players to keep a number in their heads for more than 5 seconds. So, you know, good luck with that. When playing online, I sometimes have them write their initiative rolls in the chat, and that helps a lot. Otherwise, I will do it like this. I will roll my NPC initiatives first, and then jot them in the header of my notes page, and Then I'll go through initiative ranges in increments of 5. 20 plus, 15 to 20, 10 to 15, 5 to 10, and less than 5. I will outline how this works a little bit more clearly in the example combat later in this video. So while I'm doing this, hopefully my players will be paying close enough attention to call out their number in the right category. And fate's willing, I will end up with a nicely sorted list like this, with the highest initiative at the top and the lowest at the bottom. Then, as each player or NPC takes their turn going down the page, I will mark them off with an X. Once the turn ends, I will start a new column of X's, and lo and behold, I now have a record of whose turn it is and how many turns the combat has been going on. So while that is basically the bare bones of my system in a nutshell, this is Dungeon Mastery, not Dungeon in a nutshell. So I will show you how to use this same game system to track reactions, concentration, held actions, and other inconveniences that DMs must traditionally waste finite brain power on remembering, when they should be focusing on telling better stories. So first of all, as a piece of advice, you should try to avoid, wherever possible, tracking many different monster initiatives. It just overcomplicates your combat when it doesn't need to, and it is far more efficient to simply group all monsters of a given type into the same initiative point. In fact, if I have no reason to do otherwise, I will simply delineate all monsters acting together by 3 letters on the page. NME, meaning enemy. Some people might quite rightly might object to this, that this places a greater strain on healers, as the monsters can now deliver much greater burst damage and can perform all kinds of strategies and maneuvers that players whose turns are spaced out over multiple initiative points cannot. To which I say, yes, but so what? I would always, almost always, accept any manageable strategic inconvenience over wasting my time on combat admin when I could be using that same energy to run dynamic combats that extend beyond grid squares, to instill drama, and to provide vivid descriptions that make the players feel more involved in the world and in their characters. There are exceptions to this rule, of course, as there should be exceptions to any mechanical rule, and we will cover them as well. Now, as I said earlier, the downside to this whole list system of initiative, listing the initiative names, is how do you fit new participants who are joining the combat midway through into your list without redrawing the whole list? My simple solution is to wait until the end of the round to introduce new combatants, and then announce their arrival as I add them to the bottom of the list, and then immediately cross them off for that round, as entering the combat represents their entire action for that round. This gives the players a grace period whereby, stealth notwithstanding, they can observe the new combatant approaching the battlefield or readying themselves, and then, on the following round, the new combatant acts normally. Obviously, this makes initiative orders less dynamic. But again, I don't care. If you really value the sanctity of arbitrary mathematical constructs that much, then I'm sorry, but I guess we're playing very different games, and best of luck to you. Anyway, so moving on. When a combat participant uses their action to cast a concentration spell, or when they continue to concentrate on their turn, instead of marking off their action with an X, instead I use a C. Then, when they lose concentration, I just scribble out the last recorded C. This has the benefit of letting me see how many turns a person has been concentrating on their spell. Or in the case of spells with a very short duration, I might even record a number like C1, C2, C3, but only if it serves a utility. If it doesn't, I don't. Likewise, if a character uses their reaction, I will quickly record a small letter R above their last action, as if writing X to the power of R. As their reaction resets on their turn, this will let me keep track of that, knowing that until a fresh X or C or whatever is written, they are presently without a reaction. I can also record status effects in the same way, using whatever shorthand works best, like ST for stunned or PS for poison, just for examples. Conversely, if the status effect dominates the turn, such as how stunned will consume their whole turn, I may arbitrarily choose to record it as the large marker instead. Likewise, I can record and track held actions the same way. When a player declares a held action, I can record their action as H. And when the conditions for their held action are met, I will add a small r to indicate that they used their reaction to perform the held action. You can use this system to record practically anything relevant to the round-to-round running of the combat. But remember that, at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you understand your own shorthand, and that you are making things simpler for yourself, not more complex. Which segues into a final word of caution that I fear may only anger the math brains further, as it relates to their greatest anathema, nuance. Returning to the previous point about tracking multiple monsters on a single initiative point, doing it that way, it will hinder your ability to record multiple reactions, multiple held actions, or concentration effects as performed by multiple monsters that you are recording on that single initiative point. So personally, I recommend using your judgment on a case-by-case basis to decide which enemies you want to play like a horde, and separate them out from the more unique monsters such as named commanders or individuals whom you might play with more strategy in mind. Ultimately, do whatever works for you. Alright. So now that I have told you how it works, I want to show you with an example combat, a sample combat, told as a story. Our story begins as the elf ranger Lynchavari is leading their party through the Kingswood, closely followed by the half-orc fighter Rick-Tig the Mighty and the human wizard Gelderak the Green. On the path ahead, goblins have set up an ambush. The heroes fail to notice the ambush, and so combat begins, with the party surprised. We all roll for initiative. I decide to roll once for my goblins all together, but to roll my goblin shaman separately. I get 11 and 4 respectively, which I jot down in the header of my page. Then to my players. To establish their initiative order, I call out 20 plus. Silence, no one rolled over a 20. 15 to 20. Richtig announces a roll of 19. So I record him at the top of my list as Rick. Because orcs are green, and now I'm imagining him as Pickle Rick. Next, 10 to 15. Linchavari rolled an 11, which happens to be the exact same number I rolled for my goblins, but I know that Linchavari has the higher dexterity score, so I record Linchavari as Link. Because despite their claims that this is an original character, they're not fooling anyone. Then, I record NME after, referring to my mini-goblin army. Then it's just one player and one NPC left, so rather than continuing to go down calling out numbers, I just ask Geldrag what he rolled. A natural 1. So I write down Gob for Goblin Shaman, and then Geld. Because Geld means to cut someone's balls off, and that's what Geldrag's dice are trying to do to him today. So, now we have our initiative order. And as the goblins manage to spring their ambush successfully, I will start the combat off by crossing off all of the party members for the first round to represent that they do not get to act during the surprise round. The goblins start out by unleashing a volley of poisoned arrows, doing some damage spread across the party, which I don't need to record because the players can track their own damage. But Geldrag critically fails his con save, because of course he does, and is poisoned. So I put a little PS for poison above his X as a reminder. Meanwhile, one goblin drops a net onto Linchavari from an overhanging branch, restraining them, which I record as a little RS. And finally, the Goblin Shaman attempts a stealth check to sneak into a position where they may catch the whole party in a fireball on their next action, without exposing their own position. The Shaman unfortunately fails to beat Linchavari and Geldrag's passive perceptions, and they are spotted as they duck behind a tree. Now, at the top of the second round, Richtig goes first. He moves up and he cuts Linchavari out of the net, so I cross off the RS for restrained. "I never thought I'd be fighting side to side with an elf," he grumbles and then dashes off after the goblins. "What about with a friend?" replies Linchavari, as I make the mental note that all my friends are dorks. Next, Linchavari wants to shoot the shaman, but I remind them that the goblin is in full cover behind the tree, so instead Linchavari decides to hold their action to fire an arrow at anyone who steps out from behind that tree. I mark their action as an H. The goblins act next, firing more arrows, doing more damage, and surrounding Richtig. Next up, it is the shaman's turn, and he steps out to fireball Linchavari and Geldrag, triggering Linchavari's reaction. I mark a small R over their H to symbolize the used reaction, and they shoot, dealing 14 damage out of the shaman's 25 hit points. I record the damage by the shaman's name, advising them that the shaman is now badly injured. And below, I mark off a 3rd level spell slot as the fireball goes off. At which point Geldrag speaks up. Do the rules let me use my reaction to counterspell even though I haven't had a chance to act yet? He asks. Sure, you can do that, I say, without even bothering to look up the rules because it would be cool and funny, and that means I am obligated to try to make it happen. So the fireball is extinguished before it can even happen, catching the shaman off guard such that they forget to step back into full cover. Gelderak is up next, and I start by transposing his poisoned marker onto the current round and reminding him that he is still poisoned. Fighting back nausea, Gelderak decides that he has had enough of these goblins and successfully casts Banishment on the goblin shaman, meaning the Gelderak is now concentrating on a spell, so I record a large C for his action. I describe how, after failing to sneak, the shaman is shot by an arrow, his spell fizzles, and then he vanishes into thin air. After several "I don't feel so good, Mr. Stark" jokes, we carry on with the combat. Round 3 starts with Riktig. He swings twice, killing one goblin outright, which I just record as a G and then cross it out so that I have a record that one is down. And then he deals 9 damage to the second one out of its 10 hit points. To distinguish this nearly dead goblin from the fully dead one, I write G2 and put a 9 next to it. I also announce to Riktig that the little bugger is barely hanging on. The goblins are up next, and while I know that the smart move here is for me to have them all target Gelderak with their arrows, trusting that he will fail the concentration check and bring the shaman back just in time to try to turn this fight around, at the same time, I'm role-playing here just like everyone else, and my poor little goblins, well, they're not that bright. So, having just seen their leader appear to be vaporized in an inglorious demise, they all drop their weapons and run. Riktig insists on taking his attack of opportunity, but I feel no need to record it or even roll for it as the fight is over, so I just tell him he kills another goblin and we carry on with the story. And that, magpies, in a dungeon and a nutshell, is how I track my combat. So thank you for listening, magpies, and I sincerely hope that my personalized, bona fide combat tracking system will simplify your battles in some way, or at least give you something that you can take and add to your system, to leave more time for the important stuff. So, a heads up, and this is the bit where I do the e-begging, so if you would just subscribe, comment, apparently there's a bell too you can press, you know what to do. Just like you already know that this tiny act tangibly helps small content creators like me. So if anything in this video helped or amused you, help me out by passing on the good vibes and by gaming the algorithm. You know the deal. Alright, more DM tips soon. Swoop swoop, I'm out.